Hi, everyone. We are now live. So I just want to say welcome to the first Stellar Protocol meeting of 2021. So in a minute, we're going to do some quick introductions. But first, I just want to take a second to give a quick overview. What are we here for? So the Stellar Protocol is designed to evolve to meet the changing needs of the growing ecosystem, all the different projects that are building on Stellar. And actually, the proposals that we'll discuss today are kind of a perfect example of how that works, right? They make it easier to issue regulated assets on Stellar. So the purpose of this meeting is to discuss and plan for those changes. In case you're not aware, protocol changes, which are implemented in Stellar Core, they're submitted as core advancement proposals, or CAPs for short, and they have a very specific life cycle. They generally start with a discussion on the Stellar Dev mailing list, and then they're drafted and further discussed on that list. And kind of when they baked a bit, we bring them to this meeting where we raise issues and address key questions and really start to hammer out the details. The draft of a CAP goes through several stages before it's accepted and ultimately implemented into a new version of the protocol. And validators have to actually vote to accept that new version of the protocol in order to upgrade the network. So there's a lot of steps. I want to also say that every step in that process is public. So if you're interested in keeping up with or even participating in discussions about the future of the Stellar Protocol, I definitely urge you to check out the Stellar Protocol repo on GitHub and also to join the Stellar Dev mailing list. That's where discussions about these things originate. There are links in the meeting description, so anyone listening, you can join right in. In case it wasn't clear from that overview, what follows is going to be a pretty specific and pretty technical discussion. We're mostly going to focus on Cap29, which would make some modifications to the allow trust operation in order to better support regulated assets. And then we're going to talk about Cap35, which is what probably the bulk of this meeting will be about Cap35 asset clawback, which provides an issuer with a means to claw back assets from a holder in order to support regulatory requirements. There are links to the proposals and to the discussion threads of those proposals in the show description. And if you really want to follow along, you should probably check those out. Again, there's a lot there, but it will really help you if you're sort of looking at the nitty-gritty details while we have this discussion. So that's kind of my overview, but before we actually start, let's do some just quick introductions. So when I call on you, just say your name, your title, and your affiliation. I will start. I am Justin Rice, Head of Ecosystem at the Stellar Development Foundation. Tomer?
Tomer Weller, Head of Integration, Stellar Development Foundation.
Dan?
I'm Dan Doney, the CEO of Securency. We're a blockchain-based financial service infrastructure company.
Awesome. Lee?
Hi, I'm Lee, Principal Software Engineer at the Stellar Development Foundation.
Jonathan?
Hi, I'm Jonathan Jove. I'm a Senior Software Engineer at the Stellar Development Foundation.
Nicola?
Yeah, Nico Berry. I'm a CTO of the Foundation.
Great. Eric?
My name is Eric Saunders. I'm a Horizon Engineering Manager at Stellar Development Foundation.
Siddharth?
Hi, I'm Siddharth Suresh. I'm a software engineer at the Stellar Development Foundation.
Great. Karen? Uh-oh, we didn't hear Karen, but can you try one more time? I think your audio's, there's something up with your audio, and we'll figure it out. But and finally, I believe David.
Hi, I'm David Mazieres. I'm Chief Scientist at Stellar Development Foundation.
Okay, great. So let's get started. In sort of a last minute decision, we flipped the agenda and we decided to talk about Cap29 first. It's a smaller discussion and there's less to work out in a way. And also it sort of logically makes sense because Cap29 has to do with the existing authorization flags on accounts. So Cap29 has the catchy title, Allow Trust When Not Auth Required. Basically a trust line authorization, it's an important feature of the Stellar Protocol. It allows issuers to handle various regulatory requirements. Currently, there are two flags that you can set on an account, Auth Required and Auth Revocable. However, the way the Allow Trust operation works with those two flags probably needs a bit of tweaking. So the goal is to kind of clean it up. Basically, the idea is that issuers should be able to authorize a trust line even if their account doesn't currently have an auth required flag set. And they should also be able to revoke trust if they have the auth revocable flag set on their account, even if they don't have the auth required flag set. So right now you have to have them both set. That would basically allow them to deny list certain accounts, which again is valuable for issuing regulated assets. So this cap, it introduces 2 changes to the allowed trust operation in order to achieve those goals. So that's the summary. I think anyone can kick off the discussion. I think this cap originated with Tomer. So Tomer, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, just quickly discussing the use cases that we have an issue with right now. One is that what happens when an issuer changes authorization flag. So let's say that I issued the Tomer asset with an auth required flag to begin with. Justin created a trust line. That trust line is by default unauthorized until I allow auth true. But let's say that later on, I change my authorization flags. I remove the auth required, and now I want to elevate Justin's trust line to be authorized. I can't do that because the auth required flag is not set. So it creates like a bit of a weirdness. I need to reset it in order to set Justin's proper authorization flags. So this is one case that we want to fix. The other case is, what if an issuer wants to have a blacklist asset? That means that by default, the authorization state is true, is authorized, but if the issuer wants to disallow that, they can deauthorize the state. Right now, they can only invoke the allow trust operation with authorized false if the auth required flag is there. So this is a pretty unoffensive cap. It just fixes the semantics to make sense. Yeah, that's it.
First, kind of obvious question. Why did the issuer unset their flag? Why not just leave it?
Are you talking about the case when an issuer modifies their authorization flags?
I mean, this stuff
Their
doesn't
account.
work. This stuff doesn't work if the issuer turned their flags off, but I guess I'm wondering why they did that.
Maybe the authorization requirements changed. Maybe they started, when they did the first distribution of tokens, it needed to be regulated, but for some reason down the road, it doesn't have to be. So, the idea is that right now, like we don't want, as long as issuers don't set the authorization flags to immutable, we want them to have the freedom to move between these things. And this currently gets in the way.
I feel like there also have been cases where someone started with an auth required asset and realized that it wasn't necessary. And so they essentially made an error when they initially set the flag on the account.
I mean, I'm all in favor of consistency, and this just seems to make our transactions semantics more consistent. So why have weird little rules that disallow certain things in certain corner cases, in certain situations, if we don't need to? So it just seems like an obviously good idea.
Yeah, I'm with David on that. And following up on that, it's like we're making the rules simpler in a way that, anybody who is relying on these rules, I mean, there's no sensible way in which you could have been like, oh, my business is based on these particular rules being in effect. My application is designed to taking these things into account. There's no compatibility risk to changing this stuff. I don't see how you could have relied on this.
Is this the shortest cap discussion we've ever had?
I guess my question is, why is it like this? I mean, presumably we had an idea back in the
Excellent
day.
question, Eric. I wasn't here for the origins of this, but from studying the code, I have some good hypotheses about this. And I think there were some other things in the code that we've already changed. Siddharth did the work on it. I think it was Cap 28, maybe. But basically, like, this name auth required is very misleading. Like, from my perspective, the name should be something like auth default or something like that. Like, do you default to true or default to false? And that's what the flag actually does inside of Stellar Core. But because it has this name Auth Required, there were lots of places in the code where there were things that we were doing that looked like we were going to check this flag on the issuer's account. But we don't actually do that. And so I think that this behavior kind of originates from this very, very misleading name more than anything else. I don't know, people like Nicola might have a perspective on why it was written like this originally, if he can remember back that far.
A lot of things happened very quickly, that year. Yeah. No, I don't remember.
So it seems like no one has an objection to this cap. I mean, is that correct? Does anyone have an objection? I'd say if so, now's the time.
What I object to is, like, psychologically, I think we all feel like there needs to be some minimum discussion time for any proposal. But if it's just an obviously good idea, let's just like get it over with. It's done.
Great. Then I was sorry. Go ahead.
Kilmer stuck to his word, and this is 15 minutes or less. So that's impressive.
Yeah, it's eerie. Okay, great. I mean, are there any follow-up like questions that we need to address before we move on, just in terms of thinking about the implementation of this cap, or we just move on to Cap 35?
So one last point following on what John said, do we think we should take the opportunity and rename these flags?
I discussed this with Lee a bit, and I pitched that same thing. Relevant, this came up in the discussion of Cap 35 as well, and Lee kind of convinced me that, like, from an ecosystem perspective, renaming this would be nightmarish. I'll let Lee chime in on that if he wants to, but I was pretty convinced that it's not a good idea.
Yeah, so these names, they obviously exist in the protocol. They also exist in Horizon's API. And that consistency is elegant, that you can look at the Horizon API and you can see a flag name. You can read documentation that discusses the protocol, and it's the same. So if we were to change it in one place, it would be ideal to change it in other places to maintain that consistency, but that would break Horizon's API because the actual name auth_required, auth_revocable, they show up in the API as field names.
I think the cost outweighs the benefit of changing the name, personally.
Just
Okay.
take the victory. We're
moving on. Thank you. That's the right way to do it, David. Okay, then we're going to move on to Cap 35. So as I mentioned at the top of this meeting, Cap 35 defines a method for allowing an issuer to claw back an asset in order to support regulatory requirements. It could be used, for instance, to recover assets that have been fraudulently obtained, to respond to regulatory actions, and to enable someone who can prove their identity to recover an asset in the event of key loss or theft. So this proposal, which was updated very recently, it currently introduces a new account flag, a new trust line flag, a new claimable balance flag, and two new operations, one to claw back an asset and one to claw back a claimable balance. Dan, I think you understand the need for this change more than anyone. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Just a little background on this. We are doing a series of experiments with a number of prominent regulators from around the world. And we did a pretty significant experiment demonstrating the ability to enforce regulatory rule sets from different jurisdictions in using Stellar's DEX. And it was very well received by regulators in that particular setting. That is the ability to enforce policy in a decentralized setting using the SEP8 pattern. And out of that discussion came a second discussion that the regulators are particularly interested in. That has to do with custody. And you see assets in general falling into one of two patterns, one which is a bearer instrument pattern. Bearer instrument patterns have certain benefits in the marketplace in terms of being censorship free, but they also have certain downsides to their nature. And this is one that makes them much more difficult to regulate. And from a regulator's perspective, there's a particular record keeper role, which has certain responsibilities into the marketplace, known as a transfer agent. The transfer agent, if they fail to execute their responsibilities, can be sued, but they keep the official record. In the absence of the transfer agent being able to correct the record, you can't have records on blockchain for securities. But it turns out with a clawback mechanism, you can actually empower a transfer agent, that is a licensed entity with this responsibility, to correct the record. And why would it do that? And the big thing that, for example, the SEC worries about is the case of the Canadian exchange operator who disappears or dies and loses custody of a number of their clients' assets. And there's nothing that the marketplace can do about that scenario. The SEC sees for trillions of dollars worth of securities riding in these ledgers, that would mean that they have to be securities experts for everyone who performs a broker role in the marketplace. And that to them is just frightening, and no one would ever get through. It would be just way too much of a responsibility. I'm not trying to discount the SEC's position on these things, but they see the ability to correct the record as an essential component. The central piece of correcting the record is executing a clawback. If someone has made a mistaken or an illicit transaction, if you can pull back that asset and put it to its rightful owner, you have the means to correct the record. So this is the nature of this element came down to regulated assets. As we've interacted with regulators globally, virtually all of them require some form of this, which will easily fall into, we believe, the structure of what's been produced here with the Cap35. Hopefully that provides some background. And I'd be happy to answer questions if there's any anything else on this. We happen to be going in and showing the regulators this in the near future, and that's why there's some pressure to show that Stellar can be used in a way that satisfies the world's regulators, very prominent regulators, that Stellar is suitable for securities.
I just want to clarify, when you say we, you mean Securrency, correct?
Correct.
Great. Cool. I mean, there's already been a lot of back and forth on the mailing list about this proposal, and it seems like there are specific issues to discuss. And I think the first one that came up is about the immutability of clawback capability and how it relates to trust lines and claimable balances. Lee, could you tell us a little bit more about what that means, what the issue is?
Yeah, so it's important to be transparent with an investor, or that is a token holder, as to what rights they have and what rights can be removed. So you want it to be absolutely clear if they're holding one of these regulated assets versus a bearer instrument, that this is an asset that can be clawed back. Because ultimately that's an investor's choice. If you don't want to have assets that have this kind of regulatory oversight, that's your right. So you need to as you look at the asset, have the indicators that are going to tell you that it either is or isn't in this category. And what follows from that is, even if it is not in this category, it can't be placed in this category against their will. So once you have designated an asset as regulated, even if if you have designated it as a bearer instrument, there's no way that someone can backdoor you on this. And so that was an important part of the shape of the discussion around the cap.
Yeah, so to address—
That's with auth immutable, or you're saying that's anyway?
So there's a couple of ways that we address what Dan is talking about. So the first is, yeah, auth immutable exists. Auth immutable exists. So and still applies to this new flag on the issuer account. So if somebody is using that, they can't enable clawback enabled in the same way that they can't enable auth required or auth revocable if they're not set. The second way is that the proposal Cap35 snapshots the state of the issuer account's clawback enabled onto the trust line when the trust line is created. And the claimable balance snapshots the state of the trust line's clawback enabled flag onto itself as well. So it sort of inherits that state. So when an account trusts an issuer today, if the issuer enables clawback tomorrow, it doesn't apply to accounts that have already trusted that issuer. They get the state from when they trusted, and then claimable balances are the same. So a user or an account holder can have some confidence that if they create a claimable balance tomorrow, it will still not be clawback enabled. And yeah, I think this is something that we want to discuss is this appropriate? Should it be possible to change it?
That's actually one of, yeah, like one of the, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, like the thing I was going to say is like one of the thing I wanted to, and I think the current version of the cap actually reflects that. One of the things I really wanted to get in this cap was as a property that if we do have assets on the network today that do not want this, or that do not expect this kind of capability to exist, they should basically not care. And I think, yeah, like right now we are actually achieving that.
Yeah, so what this actually would mean for all accounts, or for all trust lines that already exist on the network, all trust lines would start with this cap clawback disabled. So this would have no impact on existing trust lines or accounts holding those trust lines, and therefore no impact on any claimable balances that are created from existing trust lines either.
But so one problem with so I agree with that idea in general, but one problem I have with the specific implementation is that what if you do want to set or clear the flag on a trust line, right? So I can think of like several scenarios where the current proposal would not work. So for example, let's say that an issuer revokes authorization from a trust line and offers to restore it in exchange for adding the clawback flag. So this would be like a very realistic thing to do in response to some kind of regulatory change where you're like, okay, I'm freezing your assets because you kind of ignored my request. You either have to like sell these assets back to me right now or like, you know, comply with like the new regulation. Another example would be that you have different clawback policies for like institutional versus like individual accounts, right? And now there's no way to it's very hard to create these institutional accounts. You'd have to create these sandwich transactions, and those sandwich transactions would not work if you added auth immutable, right? I mean, another thing you might want to do is have clawback only for, you know, depending on like the limit of the trust line. So like, although I guess people can actually raise their limits after a trust line has been authorized, but you know, it might be nice to say like, you know what, I don't care for people to store $100, right? But you know, if anybody's going to store like millions of dollars, like I need to be able to claw that back because maybe they stole it or something.
Yeah, David, this is a piece where if you take the two capabilities in combination, I think you get the outcomes that you want without a change. That is,
except that there's no way to tell me how to add the clawback enabled flag or remove it from an account from a trust line that already exists. That seems to be missing. Either a description of it is missing from the cap or the mechanism is missing.
It's a fair point. The desire to potentially freeze an account using a mechanism and then basically force the party to either fall into the new regime or maintain their account as frozen. Let me separate that thought for a second and address the second point that you raised regarding, hey, there may be some difference between a wallet that it's an account that's an institutional party versus a retail party, or a range of different options. We handle that through the policy component of a regulated asset. So we're able to tag to addresses or wallets specific characteristics, and one might be a characteristic or an attribute of being an institutional party. And that then affects the rules on how that wallet transacts with this specific asset. And so in this, we're able to set limits like if it's not more than 1,000, then the following things can happen. Or if this party has certain rights, they can transact with parties who have other rights. And we do that at the movement of value using the SEP8 strategy. And there the policies can
but hold on. But the problem is this is not a SEP problem. It's a cap problem, right? So imagine a situation where, you know, you know, there's some central bank issues a bunch of digital currency. Somebody else, you know, like I'm going to buy like $1 billion worth of your asset, but it can't be clawed back, right? So everybody else has clawback. You want that $1 billion investment, right? So you're willing to do that to me, so we could collaborate together and sign a transaction. But the current mechanism doesn't provide us any way of doing that, right? If you want everybody else to have the clawback flag on the clawback enabled flag on their trust lines, there's no way to sort of create a particular special account that doesn't have this flag.
Okay.
Particularly if you have Auth Immutable.
Here's how we handle that scenario. I'm just, if this were the challenge that was presented to me, I would handle it this way. I'd actually issue 2 different share classes, one with auth revocable and one that could not be clawed back. Okay, so now I have 2. And so those exist, and they
But
carry
that's not the same. That's not what I'm asking for. What, like, you still, I want to be able to trade. I'm going to buy $1 million worth of your asset. I want to be able to trade that on the open market. You want to be able to claw it back from people who steal the assets. But, part of our special, bespoke deal is that you're not going to be able to claw this back from me because I'm laying out a lot of money, right? So this is a very realistic thing to do. We, if we could set the bits to the right values, we would be able to do that. There's no reason why the issuer, if both the issuer and the owner of the trust line consent, they shouldn't be able to configure this. But the mechanism proposed here does not allow them to do that, and I don't see a justification for not having a mechanism to do that when everybody's on board with the fact that that should happen.
Okay, David. So let me offer you 2 options here. Well, let me offer you one option, but that addresses these 2 things. Like, I think that going in the downgrade direction, taking an asset that's clawbackable and making it non-clawbackable, that's completely unoffensive. I actually have already spoken with Siddharth about how we would implement that. We're pretty clear on what we would need to do. It's not hard. But the other direction is not cool. You can't take something that's not clawbackable and make it clawbackable.
Well, I think that why shouldn't the owner of the trust line be able to do it? I think the issuer of the asset should be able to remove the clawback flag, and the owner of a trust line should be allowed to add the clawback flag.
But the owner, like, if the owner is going to cooperate, they can already do this. How do you do it?
How?
So all you have to do is make a cosign transaction between the issuer and the asset and the holder. The holder sends the money back to the issuer, deletes their trust line, recreates their trust line, and the issuer sends the money right back. And now
okay. So hold on. So first of all, one thing, I have a bunch of comments on this. So one comment is that I think that the CAP should make some suggestions for the ecosystem, and Horizon should keep track of how many times clawback has been used on any given asset and how much has been clawed back, because this is going to be information people are going to want. And it is one thing to allow someone to claw something back. It's another thing to actually send them the payment, because then they could, when this comes to court, this is going to be a mess, right? They're going to be like, you sent the money back to us because of this other agreement or whatever. And this is very, it very much weakens the negotiating hand of the person who owns the trust line if they have to literally send all the money back and delete their trust line.
What if they just
and also
create
it's just
a new
think
account?
about implementing this. It's it's much more of a mess, right?
No, I think it's a mess if you'd actually allow people to go from something that is not that you cannot claw back to can be clawed back. Because think about it, basically breaks any kind of assumption you can imagine in terms of pre-signed transactions and all that stuff. Because at this point, the issuer gets full control on any kind of intermediate step in those smart
But wait
contracts.
a second, if I can send the coins back to the issuer, why shouldn't I be allowed to add the clawback enabled flag? That's clearly less of a thing to do, right?
I mean, I guess I don't have any, yeah, okay. I don't have any material opposition to doing it. It's just since I can give you a way to do it without changing the protocol, why should I change the protocol?
But it's not the same thing, right? It's not atomic.
No, that is atomic. That's a single transaction.
Sorry. It requires me to cancel all my orders and stuff. I mean, it's a total mess, right? Look, in 1 month, because of this regulatory change, we're going to require all our customers to either add the clawback flag or or we're going to like freeze it by revoking the authorization on the trust line, right? And so now the customers should have a month, and at their leisure, they should be able to do this. They shouldn't have to coordinate with us, like send the money back to us and like trust us to send it back to them, or like do some complicated protocol where we like pre-sign some transaction.
But I think this sounds like I don't know, like a far-fetched scenario to basically say, hey, I have this asset, I'm going to make it now
Clawbackable.
Whatever. That's not a word. Yeah, because like I think like what Dan was saying, like I think the more realistic way to do this would actually to issue a new asset and then ask people to just move over. Like it's way cleaner. Like it's, you know, you don't have like this mixed mode.
I mean, it's not like what I'm asking for. What I'm asking for is not complicated. It's kind of more consistent, right? Like it's just gonna, we already have operations to like set flags on our on trust lines, right? And
but not on yourself. That would be a new thing. I don't think you can control your own flags today.
Well, in
I mean, like as an issuer you can.
Hold on, let me look at change trust.
As an issuer you can, but like those are like authorization flags, right? They're different.
I guess for me, David, like the main thing that I want to kind of bring up here is like, we don't have to do this now. Like we could do it now. There's nothing stopping us. Like, I agree it's a cleaner way to implement this if it's something that people really actually want. But I'm like, not convinced it's something that people would actually do based on what Dan was saying. And if it is something that people really do want to do, as we just agreed, it's easy. So like, it's a change in semantics. Like we don't allow anything like this today, but there's nothing stopping us from allowing it in the future. It'd be an easy thing to do at any time. If the need for it actually comes up, we can just do it. But I don't think we need to. I don't think we need to do it now, basically.
Okay, but we do need to remove. We need to remove the flag.
Yeah,
right?
I see a lot of compelling reasons to have the remove part. The remove that seems right.
Another thing to consider here regarding John's previous suggestion of co-signing a transaction and doing this with the issuer. These issuers are interactive right now. Okay, like they're probably doing Cap 18 sandwich transactions. They're co-signing every transaction. So the interactivity by the issuer is not a big hurdle here. It's already there.
I mean, it's just like massively like sending someone all your money. Like it like, who knows? Maybe are there like tax implications for this? Like, are you, because you've like actually given someone the money? I don't know. It's just a bit like there's clearly no security issue. Like it is a bit that something that's someone owns a trust line should be able to consent to. So like, why not provide them a mechanism for that?
And just to be clear, you think that there might be a way to basically load that mechanism into change trust, into the change trust option.
No, I guess we don't have we don't it wouldn't work in change trust.
So it needs to be a new operation. It
would have to be in like allow trust with a different signer, but that's a mess. So yeah, I guess it would need another operation. So
I'm sorry, David. We use what we frequently issue assets that represent different rights. So this would be tranches or share classes. So for example, you have an instrument denoted XYZ.
Right. And that is absolutely not what I'm talking about here, right? Like, so I'm talking about a situation where you need to have the same asset as everybody else because you need to be like participating in the DEX with this asset. And so you need to have fungibility. So I'm only concerned about the case where you need fungibility, but you have different classes of asset holder, just not different classes of asset, right?
Yeah, I actually think those represent different rights in a way that's maybe subtle but meaningful. And of course, on the DEX, you can always trade one set of rights for another. So you can trade if both assets exist, one with clawback and one without clawback. There's a
again, I think we're just going down a rat hole. It's not productive. I do not care about that case. I understand that that's a valid case, but that's already supported, so we don't need to discuss it.
That's fair. Right. That's fair.
You're talking about something different from what I'm talking about. I'm saying like, you know, I'm hiring someone to to, you know, like I have this bespoke deal where I'm going to give someone a lot of something that a lot of individuals have a little bit of, and because of that, I'm willing to give them more rights. So so it seems like there's agreement that we can at least support that scenario, and we'll have to wait for the other one. So so I have a couple of other critiques. So first of all, I think that we have this mentality that we've like made this mistake of putting the extension switches at the end of structures like so many times. Like, well, why not do it one more time? But it's still a mistake. So I really think that we should put the union at the top of the structures, the ext union at the top of the structures, and not at the end. I don't, just because we made the mistake 10 times, like that doesn't mean we should make it an 11th time. There's just no justification for like tying our hands in terms of like future extensibility by not allowing us to union the whole data structure. So, you know, sorry to sound like a broken record.
Which data structure are you talking about here? Sorry.
Well, any of them, like anytime there's, let's see, I actually don't have the thing in front of me. So if I pull up, just search for like ext.
Because
we add these
those
like
are operations, right? Like you're talking operations then, because operations, we don't need that. We already have the union.
Claimable balance entry extension v1. The switch is at the end.
Oh, and you're saying to move that
at
into
the beginning.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I don't care.
Okay, great.
What benefit does it just?
Well, it gives you many more options for future upgradability. Like you could decide to version the whole data structure instead of just keep like appending like, you know, more and more nested things. And so it makes potentially makes source code compatibility a lot easier. Like because we didn't have this on transaction, we had to like jump through some like pretty gross hoops when we wanted to extend the transaction format.
It sounds like there's no objection to that very specific idea. Is that true?
Fantastic. Because I feel very strongly about it. So if nobody else cares, please humor me and do that.
I do want to make sure also, I know that there's some other stuff about the way that this like how Cap35 deals with claimable balances, that I believe there's some discussion that needs to happen. Is that correct, John? Oh, you're muted. Classic.
Sorry, what was the topic? I was looking at the proposal while you were talking to me.
Oh, sorry. Clawbacks and claimable balances. I know that there is some discussion around how they interact. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a little bit of discussion, and there's also some interesting topics about like about what flags we should be using or reusing. Depending on how many more comments David has, I think we can go through them.
I have two more. I'll try to make them quick. Well, one is quick, and the other, well, maybe we can defer. So the quick one is please give the data structure for an asset code a name, because it appears also in the allow trust stop thing. And this is particularly a kind of data structure that you want a special case when you're like rendering it in text and stuff. And so to have it like a single data structure called like asset code or asset code name or something, you know, that's just a switch.
You mean the non-native asset, right? Basically.
Yeah, exactly.
That's correct. Yeah. I think Lee already is making the change.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Perfect.
we have planned out that.
And then the other thing is just kind of to plant the seed that there's an issue. This issue comes up in a lot of other contexts, or people have complained to me that they want to create a fixed number of an asset and then continue to manage it with like auth required. And it's a bummer, because what happens is you basically create this account and you throw away the signing, the kind of high signing weight, and you keep only low signing weight so you can authorize trust lines, but then you have no way to rotate the keys. And so this situation is going to get worse, in that you'll also have no way to fiddle with like the stuff I was talking about before, where you change auth immutable. So we're not going to fix that for this, but it's something we should keep in mind when we do these proposals, that someday we should solve that problem. Okay, I'll shut up and let other people.
You also now have
listen.
no way of fixing the supply. So
yeah,
you know,
that's exactly what I was thinking, Tomer.
We've got a lot of.
That's right. That's right. You also can't fix the supply. Exactly. So it'd be cool if you could like delegate to some other account, so it can't create the asset, but it can revoke it and it can issue trust lines, add a level of indirection. That's not for this cap. That's just an idea to put in people's heads. Okay, we can move on.
John, I think you had some questions about claimable balances. Is that correct?
No, I think that we should move and let Lee talk a little bit about like the different types of flag options that we have available to us. I think that based on some discussions that we've had, that's kind of one of the things that if you look through that thread on the Stellar Dev mailing list, we have cycled through that topic like 4 separate times. And it's pretty key to actually getting an implementation ready. So I think we should go there first.
Yeah, so what we're talking about specifically is the proposal right now adds a new flag to the account flags, Auth Clawback Enabled. And what we want to talk about is, does that make sense? Does that deliver a lot of value, or should we reuse the Auth Revocable flag? Because Clawback and Revocable, conceptually, they're very similar. Like one freezes an asset so you can't use it. The other one takes it away so you can't use it. In both cases, the account is losing control over the asset. And in a lot of cases, we think if you have clawback enabled, you're probably also going to have revocable enabled, or vice versa. So in sort of inspired by Cap29 in an attempt to like clean up flags or to make flags simple and make it harder to shoot yourself in the foot with them, does it make sense just to simplify this and attach it to the existing auth revocable flag? What do people think about that?
I'll say from our perspective, we can't imagine a scenario where those rights would be distinct. So we can easily see those collapsing into the same right. From a regulatory perspective, that authority is held by the same party.
I think it doesn't hurt to keep them separate, and at the very least, there's a sort of a benefit for appearances. So sort of it goes back a while, but there's definitely things like this have been like really touchy subjects in the past where people have gotten like really upset at the idea that, you know, that you could like revoke things. And I think it could be, even if I sort of think that there may be like a transition scenario argument anyway, where like you initially issue an asset and then later decide that you actually want it to be clawbackable. And so I actually think there's value in that. But I also think that we don't want people to feel in any way that Stellar is trying to, you know, force people to like consent to like have their assets revoked. And so by taking a piece of functionality that people might already be using and saying, okay, now you can only use this functionality if in addition you're willing to give up these extra rights, I don't feel good about that. And I think there might be people, even if it's a kind of a subtle change, and maybe even if you could argue that, well, you could sort of do other things that would be bad to someone too, that they've already consented to. I don't like the idea of kind of, it feels too much like a power grab to me.
That's fair. Look, we don't have a dog in the fight in the politics of this, of course, only just for the sake of simplicity. From our perspective, and just as one of your many users, the right to freeze assets is the only distinction between the right to freeze and clawback is just the mess that you leave behind when you freeze and you don't claw back. So from our perspective, again, from a regulatory perspective, if you can do one, you really can effectively do the other. The only difference is the mess.
But it also depends like how you what sort of real world interpretation people give to these values on the ledger. So maybe you have a company that's only authorized to issue some number of shares. And so you could freeze shares that people have, but that doesn't allow you to issue more shares without, you know, amending your bylaws or whatever. Whereas, you know, you could argue, well, if you claw them back, then you could just give them to someone else. So even though like, yes, we could just kind of by convention agree that these things are equivalent, I think what it looks like on the blockchain and how easy it is to map that to how you actually interpret that in the real world, I think it's just cleaner and easier if you have two separate options. And again, it doesn't cost us much to have these two separate flags. It just seems less objectionable.
Is there a downside to having two separate flags? And if so, what is it?
Well, one of the things that Lee and I kept talking about was this this weird scenario where imagine that you are some kind of guy. I don't know what to call you because, as Dan pointed out, like it's probably not reasonable to do this, but you're some kind of entity that wants to be able to claw back but not revoke, suppose. And you were like, okay, well, like I look at the flags, it's pretty obvious. All I have to do is set the clawback flag and not set the revoke flag. Problem solved, right? Not so. Because if you do this, you're almost surely in a situation where you're about to shoot yourself in the foot. Because if your asset holders then create a bunch of offers, you will not be able to claw back the assets that are tied up in the liabilities of those offers. The reason for that is that the only way to cancel the offers for an account is to use revoke. So this is kind of one of those things where it's like, it seems like really cut and dry, and we could paste the biggest, reddest sign that you can think of in our docs, but I guarantee you somebody will shoot themselves in the foot anyway.
Yeah, you're right. There's 4 possibilities, and 3 of them are useful or plausible useful, right? And one of them probably means you're doing something you don't intend to do.
But that isn't an
but that
argument
said,
that isn't an argument to have 2 flags or 1 flag though, because you can just disallow clawback unless auth revocable is also set, right? So I mean, I get they're tied together and it seems useless, but you could have that.
Yeah, I mean, it increases the implementation burden and the mental modeling burden for users. But like, I agree, there's nothing stopping us from doing that.
I mean, it seems to be a trade-off between. It seems to be a trade-off between the mental model or overhead of the issuer versus the mental model and overhead of people that want to understand whether things can be clawed back.
The thing about about separating clawback from authorization, I think the one area where this makes a big difference is in the balance entry, actually, because as you think about the ways those things work, authorization actually is completely async in balance entries, right? You have those 2-part payments, right? You have when you create the balance entry, you need to be authorized, and then later to claim it, you have to be authorized. But then what happens in between is kind of this funny thing, right? Like, and having this as a separate flag allows you to kind of deal with situations like kind of what we were talking about earlier, when like if you want to allow, for example, to have like different downgraded accounts or whatever that don't have, that you cannot claw back. I mean, basically, you still need to propagate this flag somehow. And if you're going to propagate in balance entries, I mean, you could say, well, I'm propagating authorization. That's kind of funny, because you're always authorized. So what does that really mean? Yeah.
One clarification about the proposal is that we wouldn't be propagating the auth flag. We'd be propagating like everywhere in the cap where the auth clawback enabled or whatever the name of that flag is. You just sub in the word auth revocable. So basically it's like, the clawback enabled flag on a trust line would be set based on the auth revocable flag of the issuer at the time the trust line is created. And similarly for the claimable balance entry, it then inherits the flag from the, so it's not so bad in this, like it doesn't really contribute that.
But that's strictly less powerful than what we have right now, where you can actually remove that flag on one account. And then you have this account that basically can do all sorts of things, including creating balance entries that cannot be clawed back, right? Because maybe they are part of like nice smart contracts or whatever, where it's very clear that basically that thing cannot be messed with by the issuer.
So you're talking about the value of an account where revoking is still sensible, but clawing back is bad. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I could see that argument.
Yeah, I think the big issue. So, sorry, I think my audio just cut out.
No,
so
please go ahead.
I didn't realize I was interrupting you, John.
No, I wasn't talking. You're good.
Yeah, so I think the big negative. So really, the only big negative that I've heard people say about having 2 flags is just that that you can accidentally misunderstand how to use them, and you can set one, and then you can't actually claw back because somebody has offers. So is that an issue that we need to revisit? Like the fact that you can have clawback enabled, but you can't really claw back because somebody has offers? Like, is that? I know we defined it to work that way because from an implementation point of view, it's simple or simpler for core and the protocol. But Do we need to revisit that?
Could we have 2 flags, but just not allow one of the 4 combinations to be set on an account?
I would prefer that over the thing that Lee was saying. From an implementation perspective, that's way easier than moving how the offer destruction gets done, which is not good, and I don't want to do that. Would you be okay with that, Lee? I mean, like, I'm okay with basically saying like, hey, like, we're not going to let you do the combination. That's almost surely a mistake. Doesn't bother me. I don't know.
I think we could. It would be possible for us to say with Cap35 that they both have to be set. But if in the future we discover that actually there is a really important use case where we don't want them to both be set, that we had a proposal that then removed that constraint, or would it be, if we sign up for this constraint, is this constraint something that we need to be supporting forever?
No, because we could just allow you to set the account flags that way, right? So we're just saying that,
then I'm fine. Then I'm fine. I think that's.
So you can set the revocable flag, or you can set both flags. You can't set the clawback flag, but clear the revocable flag.
This also means that for a trust line that has revocable set and clawback set at the time it was created, that it won't be possible to use allow trust to clear the revocable flag. Is that fine?
Wait, sorry.
We don't have a flag revocable on the trust line.
Oh, oops, yeah.
So it seems like the solution is have 2 flags, only allow 3 combos, disallow the 4th combo that shoots you in the foot. That's brilliant. So we've got 5 minutes left. Is there any other issue that anyone wants to bring up? If not, Lee is offering to give a quick summary, which I think would be helpful. Great. Lee, take it away.
Okay, so I think we have 5 takeaways relating to Cap35. There was some discussion around XDRs and moving extensions at the top of any new structures that we're creating, which is an easy one. We need some definition for non-native asset code, which is an easy one. We agreed to not reuse auth revocable and to keep the separate flag, to require that both auth revocable and auth clawback are set at the same time if clawback is enabled. And then finally, there was some discussion earlier at the beginning about a need for the issuer to be able to remove clawback enabled for a trust line. Am I missing anything?
And there's going to be a common data structure between allow trust stop and the clawback, right? For like asset code or asset code name or something.
Oh, yes, yep. That was, sorry, the non-native asset code. We'll introduce some non-native asset code structure that's common between them. I think out of all of it, most of these things that I just summarized are all very straightforward. I think the one that maybe is not super straightforward is the ability for the issuer to remove the clawback flag, because there is some issues with us adding that to the existing allow trust stop, which we might need to think about.
Siddharth was actually the one who originally brought that to my attention, and I think to your attention as well, Lee. So maybe Siddharth can talk about that for a second and kind of talk about what we had presented as an option for how to kind of do that.
Yeah, so the issue with allow trust right now is it requires you to know which flags are already set, because it currently just sets the trust line flags to the parameter that's passed into allow trust. And this was fine when there was only one value, but as you add more flags, it becomes a burden on the user. Ideally, it would work the way set options works, where we specify which flags you want to set and which flags you want to, or which bits you want to set and which bits you want to clear. So what we would like to do in the future is create another operation that works the way set options works, where you can actually, you can enable clawback if you want, or you can disable clawback without knowing what the other with the other flags are.
I mean, you could just turn authorize into a union, right? There's only 2 values currently used, so.
No, that's not true. There are already 3 possible values for authorize. And with this, there would now be 6. Well, yeah, I think 6 now. That all makes sense.
Right, no, but I'm saying you don't put the 6. Instead, you have a union where the 3 existing values are just void cases. And there's another case which says set bits and another case which says clear bits and then has a 32-bit integer as the field.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whatever. This is bike shedding. Like whoever implements this should make the decision. I'm just pointing out that they're lighter weight options than creating a new operation. Although maybe they're gross enough that you want to create a new operation.
That's definitely an interesting proposal, though. I hadn't even considered that.
So I think my question here. So it sounds like there's multiple ways we go about this, and we can explore that. My question is, does this need to be a part of Cap35? The ability to
it should be. Yeah, if we're going to do it, it should be. Yeah, if it's it would be better for it to be. If it's going to completely derail Cap35 because we argue over the details of how to do something that there's 2 ways to do, then I guess maybe not. But
well, I feel like that's next steps. I mean,
explore that.
Yeah, I think we're out of time for this meeting. I feel like we did make a lot of progress on Cap35 and Cap29 too. And so, yeah, getting into those super fine details, I think can happen next time. And I just want to thank everyone for being here. Yeah, and welcome back protocol meetings. Hello 2021. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everybody watching.
Thank you.